Hello, everyone. My name is Christiane Wörner, and I'm the marketing specialist at Untitled Labs. I will be your moderator today, and I'm happy that you join our seminar today. At the end of the presentation, we will have a Q&A session. Please click on the Q&A button on top or bottom of your screen and submit your questions. Please avoid typing in anonymous questions, as we would like to reach out to you in case we do not have time to answer all the questions today. But now I would like to introduce Del Jackson to you. Del is our Senior Product Manager at Untitled Labs, and today Del will talk about Unagi. Unagi is the first hands-free benchtop buffer exchange platform that brings together all the critical steps to buffer exchange and to concentrate your samples. And now I hand over to Del.
Thank you, Christian. And hi, everyone. I'm Del. Very happy to be here. Excited to talk to you today about what you might have thought is Unagi, what you see here on the screen in front of you. So you're probably wondering why I'm showing this delicious piece of sushi to you. It's not to get you hungry quite yet. It's really just to tease you for our Unagi, which, as Christian teased already, is a solution to your buffer exchange needs. So what are those needs? Well, we can look at those here. If you log in, you're probably already interested in buffer exchange. You're probably working, odds are, with one of these molecules that you see on the screen. So just to set the stage for us, or the table, so to speak, let's talk through a few of those needs for each of the molecules. If you're working with lipid nanoparticles, typically you produce these with an organic solvent like ethanol, and it's critical to remove that, to exchange that as quickly as you can so that you can avoid any encapsulation or size changes. If you're working with a viral vector like an AAV, often what I hear is that you're able to manufacture these in large volumes, but they're often very dilute. So you want to, not only buffer exchange, but also concentrate these molecules. For nucleic acids, you're doing buffer exchange typically to get them ready for some downstream analysis that has to happen. You have to desalt them before you can run them on some other piece of analytical equipment. And if you're working with proteins or antibodies, often, once you discover your favorite protein, your favorite antibody, now it becomes a task of finding the best formulation for it to be stable in. And so you might have to do buffer exchanges for that and optimize conditions. And if you're like most people that I talk to, you're still doing this with a manual method. And it makes sense, these centrifuges, a stir plate to run dialysis are very accessible in our labs today. But with the accessibility, the trade-off is that they have drawbacks. So if you're working with dialysis, it can take a few days. I've spoken to some people who have to wait, at least 2 days before they can start working with their samples. And you run a further risk of diluting them. For centrifugation, it is faster than dialysis. Again, quite accessible, but you can run into other problems. One is you can suffer with a lack of sample recovery because of membranes clogging. As you spin samples down, you get them to past a certain concentration threshold, they tend to aggregate or gel. And also, what's not mentioned on the slide, but if you've had to do this, it's been since grad school for myself, but if you have to do this, it can take a lot of time. You're running back and forth from the centrifuge. And if you're working with TFF, it can sometimes be complicated to get your TFF run set up, but also you often need like large volumes, sometimes 100 mils or hundreds of mils to really make it worth your while to buffer exchange your samples that way. So today we're here to talk about our Unagi, which is an alternative, a better way to accomplish these tasks. And the reasons for it is that you can process up to 8 different samples, do exchanges and or concentrations. You have a working volume range of 0.5 mil or 500 microliters, all the way up to 48 mils of sample that you'd be able to concentrate down. And the nice thing is you can set this all up with just a little bit of hands-on time right at the beginning, and then be freed up to do other things that you have to put your attention towards. Well, let's get an idea more. So here's Unagi. You can see it's a benchtop system, sit in a nice compact area of your lab. How does it work? Well, first you want to start with your samples, your precious samples. This cargo will ride in our Una consumable. These consumables have a working volume range of 0.5 ml to 8 mils. They use a regenerated cellulose membrane for the filtration, and that comes in a 10 kilodalton molecular weight cutoff. The sample rack that you see there, that's where you can put from 1 to 8 Unas, so you don't have to run a full 8. I like that myself because it allows you to actually transfer your samples to the Unas at your bench, lock them into place, and then carry them over to the Unagi to let your buffer exchange or concentration happen. And speaking of, why would you pick Unagi to do your buffer exchange? Well, it's because you're going to get Unchained Labs automated pressure-based UF-DF, so ultrafiltration, diafiltration technology. And this is the most exciting thing for me to talk about as your product manager, is because this technology is innovative. And I just want to step through very briefly using this slide as a guide of the key technology pieces that you're going to get to give you higher sample recovery. The first off is what you see on the left side of the screen there, is that we use an ultrasonic sensor to measure the volume. This happens at the beginning of your run, and at each buffer exchange cycle, we remeasure it. And the way that Unagi uses that volume measurement is it can get an idea of the rate of that filtrate is flowing out of every Una for each of your samples. And this filtrate happens, occurs during our pressurization cycles, and we apply even positive pressure across all of your samples. We'll see a little bit more details for that. After this happens, after a buffer exchange cycle occurs with the presence of optional mixing, then we can refill the exact amount of filtrate that was removed at each of those steps. We do that until we reach your target value, and then you have that option to concentrate at the end. Speaking of concentration, you're not just limited to the volume that you start with in your Una. You could actually concentrate more off deck, so to speak, or off of the buffer exchange chamber. And with this, you can concentrate 48 mils a sample all the way down using our reduced sample volume application and a concentration application to 500 microliters or 0.5 ml at the end. And keep in mind, this can happen for up to 8 samples in parallel. Speaking of that mixing, why do we do that? Why do we have this gentle orbital mixing that occurs while we're pressurizing all of your samples? Largely, it gives us two things. One is better sample recovery. And what you don't have happen on Unagi is what you see on the left side of your screen here. This is the phenomenon I referred to earlier, where you will lose some of your samples. Oftentimes, if you're spinning them down, for instance, and the phenomenon is referred to as dead-end ultrafiltration. So you get an aggregation or a collection of your biomolecules of interest at the membrane interface. Because we apply this gentle orbital mixing with Unagi, we keep your biomolecules in solution. And so they're distributed more evenly across the volume of sample. And this prevents clogging, giving you higher sample recovery, but also it's nice because it's going to give you faster results as well. Something else you don't get is programmatic control. This is 2022. You should be able to enter in to a computer exactly what you want in terms of your percent removal per cycle, your percent exchange, and your concentration value. That's not something that you can do with manual methods, but if you're working with precious samples, you deserve to have that amount of fine control over your target end values. How hard is it to use Unagi? Well, it's as simple as going in and ordering your favorite sushi in a restaurant. You can order up your molecules based upon their concentration and molecule type and experiment, and you actually have 32 presets available. But this is something that you can customize very easy in our software. But the benefit is that everyone in your lab is going to be able to use Unagi. Here are a few screenshots that I grabbed of the software. I'm very proud of the work that our team did to deliver this because, really you can just with a few clicks go ahead, something that you might not might not be obvious from the screenshot, but the software actually pre-fills a lot of the information. So it will generate the sample names, the buffer names, even the experiment name based upon what your initial selections are at the home screen. This is nice just so you, again, you can within a few minutes, get your runs up and going. And that's optional too. So whatever is pre-generated for you, you're able to go in and customize it if that's necessary. So let's open the door of Unagi, peek our head in, so to speak, and take a look at what you're going to have in your lab. So here's a view of the deck inside Unagi. Let's work from the left to the right. On the left is that buffer rack. We have 16 Falcon tubes. These are common lab Falcon tubes, which we're happy to provide for you, but you most likely might already have them sitting in your lab. So we have the 50 ml variety. They should be uncapped when they're placed in the buffer rack. And just like that sample rack that I referred to earlier, same with the buffer rack that easily comes out. You can prepare your buffers if you choose, right at your bench, and then carry them right back and place them into Unagi. The Una sample rack is sitting inside of the buffer exchange chamber. We'll see a little bit that in action in a moment. On the right is the pipette channel. And this is key because this is why you're not going to have to come back after you start your run on Unagi. The buffer additions or sample additions, if you're doing a reduced sample volume application, are done for you. And what you can't quite see, but it's right there, I promise, where the number 5 is that ultrasonic volume sensor. You'll get to see that in a moment as well. And then the disposable tip racks. So it's always fun to see robots move around. So let's take a look at your Unagi. Excuse me, here's that volume measurement that occurs. You can see that it's actually also measuring the position of the Una as well. So this is key because it's going to make sure that we're doing that read, that volume measurement at the same height, so to speak, or the same position each time. So we're able to compensate for that if that's not the case. And you can see the results. So we have on the nose volume measurements. These were done with BSA 10 mg per mil, and we measured them with our Unagi and compared it to gravimetric results. And as you can see, our volume measurements are very much in line with what is in there. And it's very repeatable, standard deviation of less than 0.1. It's very reliable, consistent. And how about those buffer additions? Well, there's that single 1 mil channel. It uses air displaced pipetting technology, and it's going to transfer the buffer automatically for you. Or in the case, again, if you're running reduced sample volume, it would be transferring sample after doing a concentration cycle for you. And these I love to share. Having a background in automated liquid handlers, I'm very interested in liquid handling results. As you can see, the CVs for the dispense are less than 1% across a wide volume range. And what you see on the right is really nice. What you're looking at is results of dispense volume at the same range, what we were planning to dispense and what we actually dispense that we measured separately. And you can see for water, 20, 40, and 60% glycerol. So to give you an idea of the different viscosities. And even though you might not be working with viscous buffers, keep in mind that your samples can also change with viscosity the more concentrated they get. And what you can't see on that nice perfect line is that there's actually all of those values line up on each other. So it's accurate across a wide range of buffer and sample viscosities. And finally, the buffer exchange chamber with that optional orbital mixing. You can see that it's programmable, but you can go up to 1,000 RPMs. Not only can you program the RPMs, you can also program how much the mix rate duty cycle, if you will, how much of every buffer exchange cycle is that orbital mixing going to happen. So you put all the pieces together, and what do? You get premium recovery. So looking at some launch data that we had with IgGs, excuse me, and the different applications. So again, buffer exchange with concentrate, or running that super concentrate application, the reduced sample volume, selected varying concentrations of sample here, and what the final values were at the end, showing those recoveries greater than 96%. And a shameless plug for our other devices at Unchained Lab. We're very interested in biologics, working with biologics and gene therapy companies. You know, we have a history of giving you tools, and so we used our own Lunatic and Stunner platforms to make these measurements. It's not just for IgG. You know, Unagi is compatible with a wide range of biologics and gene therapy molecules. So again, some select launch data for you with AAV9s, LNPs, DNA, and then proteins, BSA and IgGs. And we deliver consistently high recovery values, not just across different biomolecules, but also, as you can see, different volume ranges there as well. So that's great. Unagi's working in the lab, doing your buffer exchange, your concentration for you. How are you going to know when it's done? Well, you'll have a consistent readout on the software there for you, and you'll get an overall view of the run. But also what I personally like is that you'll also get an individual readout, the progress of every single sample in Unagi. Additionally, you have the option to set it up so that you can get a text message when your run is done or any sort of status updates that might occur. So you can be confident that you're free to leave Unagi to work while you go off and do other tasks that you need to do. And all of this work, all of the initial values, and then more importantly, the final values, the target final volumes, the target final concentrations are reported for you. And so you can see it on the screen, you can print that off. Optionally, you can also export it or save it to a network file if you needed to. And you get not just the individual sample results, but also a step-by-step result through the experiment logs or the raw report of what happened in your runs. So as teased earlier, Unagi fits in well with our entire portfolio of biologics and gene therapy tools. So if you're working with monoclonal antibodies, you know you have to do, as mentioned, the cleanup, the concentration. Maybe you're doing formulation studies. Unagi is great for that, but it pairs very well with our Stunner, which can give you concentration and sizing and aggregation measurements. And then, of course, Uncle, the all-in-one toolbox. Uncle can run stability studies for you, also to give you better insight into aggregation and stability of your proteins and formulations. If you're more on the gene therapy side, working with a vector AAV, again, Unagi is going to be great. You're going to be able to concentrate with it, do any buffer exchange that you need to. And then you can put that on the Stunner to measure your capsid and genome titers, get a sense of your empty full ratio, and also look at aggregation. You know, some of our AAVs like to aggregate more than others, so you're able to measure that and check that with Stunner. And again, Uncle being used to measure stability of capsid and genome ejection. So, you know, I thank you for tuning in today. Hopefully in these few minutes, been able to tease you enough to see that if you can catch Unagi, you'll be able to get fast and flexible exchange. You're going to gain full process control with very little hands-on time. Time is precious, and Unagi is going to give you more of your time back, but you're not going to have to sacrifice anything. Unagi does buffer exchange and concentration with high recovery and sample integrity maintained. So hopefully you see that Unagi can be a delicious complement to your lab equipment. And with that, I will turn it back over to Christiane. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Del, for this great presentation and telling us more about Unagi and how Unagi can help us to save time by doing the buffer exchange and the sample concentration. I also learned it helps to improve the sample recovery up to 96%. I also like that I stay well informed because of the pinpoint reports and monitoring. But now I already see a lot of questions coming in. Are you ready for the Q&A session, Del?
Yes, I am. Let's do it.
Okay, sure. And for the attendees, please feel free to hand in more questions if you like. We start to answer the first questions. Hi, I'd like to ask for the sample concentration. Is the addition of new samples to filter auto?
Let's see. Yes. For reduced sample volume, that's going to happen automatically for you. It's a separate application. And so for reduced sample volume, again, you would put your excess sample that you want to reduce down up to 48 mils in a separate tube, and that would be in that buffer rack on the left-hand side.
Okay, great. To be suitable for biologic formulation development, a buffer exchange process must provide excellent material recovery and not impact short or long-term protein stability. How robust is Unagi to this regard?
Good question, and completely agree with you. Stability is very important, and we would never want to save time while you have to sacrifice sample integrity. So one of the great things about being a product manager for Unagi is I'm also the product manager for another product that we have, Big Tuna, which is a buffer exchange solution more for high throughput, higher capacity use. The great thing about that, though, is the technology that we use with Unagi, that buffer exchange process with the positive pressure chamber, the ultrasonic sensor, and then adding new buffer or sample automatically. We've had that on the market for a while, and the technologies are practically, they're identical. And so for Unagi, we have some initial launch data, which we would be able to share with you afterward. But we can also, if you're more interested in specific data, we have it for Big Tuna currently, and those results are the same that you'd be able to get with Unagi.
Okay, great. Can you run a large number of samples with Unagi?
Unagi is not a large number of samples, and I don't know exactly what you mean by large number of samples. So let's talk specific numbers so we can be on the same page. So with Unagi, you can run up to 8 samples in parallel. With our other platform, Big Tuna, you can run up to 96 samples in parallel. You have a little bit, you have smaller volume to run 96, or you can run 24 samples on Big Tuna. That's at the same volume range for Unagi. So, everybody might have a different idea of what a large or a small number of samples is, but those are the numbers themselves. So up to 8 with Unagi, and up to either 24 at the same volume for Big Tuna, or 96 at a smaller volume range.
Okay, great. What happens if you run out of tips during a run?
If you run out of tips during a run, the system will pause and alert you, and that will happen on the screen. Or if you set up the cell phone, the text notifications, you would get a text, and you'd simply be able to do that. I'll let you know up front, though, this doesn't consume a lot of tips, and so the likelihood of you running out of tips is very low, but it could still happen. And so to make sure that doesn't upset your runs is we will pause and notify you.
Okay. What if I don't have air hook?
Yes, so Unagi does require air. Thank you for asking. I'll probably kind of leave that out sometimes in my presentations. It's okay. We do recommend clean air if you can have the hookup. If you don't, you can run with a compressor. And actually, we can give you some more information. We found a widely available compressor on the market, but otherwise we can just give you the specifications and you can use your own or source your own. So you can use a compressor if you need to and don't have air hookup.
There is another question about where to place Unagi. Can I put this in a cold room?
Well, it's your Unagi, so technically you could, but we would not recommend it based on the fact that two reasons. One, we haven't tested this equipment running in a cold room. And so, oftentimes the risk of running equipment that wasn't designed to run in a cold room is that you can get condensation built up, and it could cause things that are unexpected. So we definitely do not recommend it. That's one of the reasons. The second is the way that the technology works, that applying positive pressure, our approach to ultrafiltration, diafiltration, is very much impacted by the viscosity of your solution. And we all know that viscosity goes up, the colder things get. And so your run rates, or I should say your buffer exchanges, the times would be increased then if you were to put this in a cold room.
Okay. With Unagi, how much hands-on does it require, such as cheeking for volume consistency, mixing of samples, and complete filtration?
0. at least 0 in terms of once you get your run set up, you push go. You don't have to touch Unagi at all. It's completely autonomous or automated for you. So you're free to do whatever you want until that run completes. So the setup time, we say less than 15 minutes. You know, I've been able to run this quite a few times myself as a product manager. So, you know, I don't even have great bench skills anymore. Those have atrophied. And it's definitely within minutes, you can put your samples up, put the buffers in there, and then you're free to do other stuff.
Okay, sounds easy. How long does the concentration of 8 samples of 48 milliliter to 500 microliter take?
So I always struggle to give, just apologies in advance for my answer, because I'm sure it won't satisfy everyone. I always struggle to answer this question because simply you can state like, well, it can take anywhere. We see run times from 1 to 6 hours on average. But again, to be completely transparent, your run times are a function of your volume and I would say the flow rate that we have. So like 200 mg per mil protein, right, will run much slower than 0.01 mg per mil. So I do know that I've seen runs happen. You had mentioned 48 mils, I believe, in the question. If that's like a dilute sample, like an AAV run, or maybe it's some fraction of a protein that you pulled off of a column, typically they're so dilute, they run really close to water. And that's about an hour to take at most, to take 48 mils down.
Okay, the same attendee had a second question. So is it possible to import sample lists instead of typing sample names manually?
The good question, not with Unagi. We do have that function on Big Tuna. And the design reason, to give you a little insight to the behind the scenes approach that we have to product development, with Big Tuna running higher sample numbers, we felt that was more of a necessity. With Unagi, just having a few samples and then us sort of pre-filling that in for you, we felt it wasn't necessary. It just overly complicated it to have to, for so few samples to be able to import.
Okay. How does Unagi handle different sample concentration in one concentration run? First sample reach target concentration very fast. The second one takes much more time?
Yes. So I'll state 2 things to answer this question. First off, thanks for the question and thanks for you following along. If you recall, we have that volume measurement that occurs at every cycle. So if you have things that are at different concentrations, that's fine, because Unagi will always make sure that the pressurization time is adapted to your fastest flowing sample. And the reason we do that is we know that your samples are very precious. And so instead of valuing runtime and just trying to force everything really quick, we value sample integrity and sample recovery. And so that adaptive filtration process is actually to your fastest flowing sample. So we'll make sure that nothing dries out. So what does this mean? Can you run samples at different concentrations? Yes, but I would say it's more of a sample concentration range. So if you were to run like a 1 mg per mil sample and with a 200 mg per mil sample, it's probably going to take a really long time because it's going to, go as slow as the 200 mg per mil. But yes, in general, you can have you have some freedom between sample concentrations to run in parallel.
Okay. I think due to the limited time, I will ask the last question. Which interfaces for the software are available? For example, SPA or API?
SDA. I'm not familiar with the SDA. For API, though, that's not available on Unagi. That's a good question. And most likely, I don't anticipate us having that. So if you're talking about software interfaces and API, that seems to me like your lab needs might be better met with our Big Tuna product. That is definitely our high throughput, our automated solution. That does have an API because we have customers who integrate that into their upstream and downstream automation. But with Big Tuna, you have that software interface. We're happy to arrange a software demo for you, but there's no API planned.
Okay, thank you, Del, for answering all the questions and for your great presentation. We were not able to answer all your questions, but we will get in touch with you and make sure you get your answers. I thank you for attending our seminar today. I hope we deliver the information you need. If you have more questions or would like to get more information about our products, get in touch at info@unchainedlabs.com or visit our webpage, www.unchainedlabs.com. Saying that, thank you for joining this morning. I wish you a great rest of your day. See you later. Bye.